Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, I'm going to go over a couple of deals, a couple of players that I think were overpaid and teams paid too much for in free agency this year. Now, to be clear, this isn't as awful as 2016, for example, when teams were handing out ridiculous amounts of money to players that certainly didn't deserve it, and teams definitely got a lot better and a lot smarter about who they were willing to throw a lot of money at in this particular offseason. So a lot of these contracts weren't especially awful. A few of them were, but not many of them were actually just incredibly awful like those 2016 contracts were, but they were still bad in my opinion, and I want to talk about a few of them. First up now, unfortunately, is a player that I actually really like and I think is critical to his team's success, but just got paid too much this offseason for a couple of different reasons, and that's Khris Middleton of the Milwaukee Bucks. You can see the deal that he signed on screen, and I understand that more so than any other player on this list, context had a lot to do with why Khris Middleton is being paid as much as he is, but that doesn't change the fact that, in my opinion, he is still overpaid, because the Bucks were in a situation where they had almost half their roster as 2019 free agents, going back to before they signed Eric Bledsoe to a contract extension during the season, and so they were going to end up spending a lot of money this offseason, especially because they were as successful as they were as a team, and by extension, a lot of their players had really good seasons. And on the other hand, Khris Middleton was going to be a highly sought-after free agent if the Bucks gave an indication that they were thinking about lowballing him and potentially allowing him to sign somewhere else. A team like Dallas was going to scoop up Khris Middleton for whatever they could throw at him, like whatever the max that they could give him. That's what they were going to try and do if the Bucks started offering Khris Middleton less and less money. So they kind of had to do this, and I completely understand that, and there's a couple of different teams across the league that were in a similar situation, but that doesn't change the fact that Khris Middleton is being paid, like, at this moment in time, a top 10 player in the NBA. And don't get me wrong, I think he's a really good player. He's an awesome complementary option, specifically for a player like Giannis that still struggles shooting. He's a really good defender, someone that can shoot, someone that can play make, someone that just does everything you need him to whenever you ask him to. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's worth the money that he's being paid on an annual basis. And I think eventually it's going to become a bit of a concern for this team, especially as they move forward and have to end up paying Giannis a huge Supermax contract. So my first overpaid player of the offseason, unfortunately, is Khris Middleton. Next up now is a guy that we kind of all knew was going to get big money this offseason, but I didn't really especially understand why teams were so enamored with him, and that is Terry Rozier, who's now going to be playing for the Charlotte Hornets. Once again, you can see what he got paid on screen, but I think people kind of forget that outside of the one really good playoff run that he had in 2018, along with guys like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum that played extremely well for the Celtics when they were undermanned in that postseason, even that season before Kyrie Irving went down and was hurt, Terry Rozier wasn't really that important of a piece for them, really wasn't that big a part of their rotation, and then caused a lot of issues in Boston this season that had to do with how poorly their year went. So I was just a little bit confused about why so many teams seem to be so excited about potentially paying him big money this season, because there hasn't really been that much evidence that he's all that good of an NBA player outside of that one really good playoff run. So the numbers that he's going to be paid on an annual basis, to me, he's certainly not worth. Now, again, contextually, I completely understand why the Hornets did what they did, because if they didn't make this work in a sign and trade for Kemba Walker, their team next year would be even more awful. They weren't in a position to bring in someone like Terry Rozier in free agency because of their salary cap situation. So making it work as a sign and trade 100% makes sense, but I still think he's going to be overpaid among a handful of overpaid players on the Hornets roster. Next up now is we get to a player that I'll admit is certainly not as big of a name as the first two guys that I mentioned, and that's Cory Joseph, who's now going to be going to the Sacramento Kings on a 3-year, $37 million deal. Now, this is kind of what I was talking about in the intro. This is not that egregious of an overpay, and it's certainly not something that's going to cripple a franchise like some of the Bismack Biyombo and Timofey Mozgov stuff that we saw in 2016, but this still just doesn't seem like very good value for a player like Cory Joseph. Now, just like with the other two players, I'll admit that there are some parts of this that do make sense. Joseph is at least very durable and is a solid playmaker off the bench, and the Kings definitely needed a backup at the point guard spot, but his numbers have gone down each of the last two seasons, even in a slightly increased role this past year as Victor Oladipo went down with injury, and it just doesn't really seem like it's going to be all that helpful for them to be paying $10+ million to their backup point guard, and one that's really not all that impactful. Like, I get they need a veteran aspect of this. I get should be a good presence in the locker room, should be a good leader for some of their younger players. I understand all of that, and they certainly had the cap space to spend, and they spent it across a lot of different players. But with Joseph specifically, I just don't think that his value on the court is going to equate very well to how much money they're going to be paying him over the next 3 seasons. And teams that were in the Kings situation where they had money to spend and spent a lot of it doesn't necessarily always mean that they're going to end up being good signings down the road, even if right now they don't appear to be all that bad. Once you start to get down in the nitty-gritty and really need salary cap space to make a big move, these kinds of contracts are one that could potentially prohibit them from doing that. So in my opinion, again, not the most egregious thing, but Cory Joseph certainly wasn't worth what they're going to be paying him for the next 3 seasons. Moving on to number 4 now, and it's kind of a similar situation, and it's Thaddeus Young of the Chicago Bulls. And surprisingly, I actually saw a lot of people being a pretty big fan of this move for the Bulls. And again, I kind of get it. Like, you have a nice veteran front court player that should be a good mentor for guys like Lauri Markkanen and Wendell Carter Jr. I understand that, but it's just about the money here. Like, Thaddeus Young, yes, he's a solid player, but he's not necessarily a great modern day 4 or 5 man. He's not a very good shooter, and I understand that he does other things for the team. But 3 years, 41 for a team like the Bulls that actually doesn't have a ton of flexibility in cap space because they're paying Zach LaVine, because the Felicio contract is still there, because they're going to have to end up paying Lauri Markkanen here pretty soon. It just didn't really make sense to me to handicap themselves by giving out a contract like this to someone like Thaddeus Young when it still seems like they're relatively far away from making the playoffs. And it might have made a little bit more sense to either maintain that cap space and keep it for whatever moves they want to make moving forward, or go with maybe a bigger 1-year deal for someone like Thaddeus Young. So again, they can just have that kind of flexibility. I just don't know how much this moves the needle for them, and it's actually a pretty significant salary figure, even though, again, I understand why on paper it kind of makes sense. It's just the money value to me doesn't make sense at all for a player of Thaddeus Young's caliber. Last up now, and this is a guy that I've already mentioned in the video this week, but I have to mention it again. It's Ricky Rubio to the Phoenix Suns. Like, and a lot of people tried to defend this in the comment section of the video that I talked about him, where I was discussing winners and losers of free agency. And initially, a lot of what I was talking about was about the fact that the Suns traded away TJ Warren to create the cap space to bring in Ricky Rubio. But I'm also going to talk about the on-the-court stuff here, because I didn't really talk too much about why I just didn't think that it made sense for them to pay him. So a lot of the people that were in the comment section were kind of saying, hey, they needed a veteran guy, they needed a leader, they needed someone that their young guys can look up to, rounds out their starting 5. Now they have Saric and Rubio and Booker and Mikal Bridges, whoever their wing is going to be, and then DeAndre Ayton as well. And I hear you and I get that. It's just about the money value. Ricky Rubio is not worth $17 million a year at this point in his career. I understand the things that he does well, trust me, but it just seemed like there was better value out there for a team like the Suns. Like, this isn't going to help them make the playoffs. We've gone through this for like 2 and 3 years now about, oh, the Suns are right on the brink. They need one good signing, they need one good move, and they'll be in the playoffs. They're not. They've won like 25 games at most over the last 4 seasons, and just bringing in Ricky Rubio at the expense of TJ Warren is not going to suddenly push them to 50 games, which is what they're going to need to win in order to make the playoffs in the West. So I don't understand this concept. I don't understand why they felt the need to give away TJ Warren just to sign a player in Ricky Rubio that doesn't space the floor all that well, could potentially hinder the on-ball playmaking development of someone like Devin Booker. I understand that he's going to be a playmaker and set up some of these other younger guys and the veteran leader aspect of all that. I completely understand that. But in my opinion, and obviously the Suns differ from me on this, I just don't think all that is worth $17 million a year, because now the Suns don't have any cap space moving forward. They're going to have to pay DeAndre Ayton. They're already paying Devin Booker a max, and this is going to be their team. Like, they're banking on some of their young guys developing on the wings. Hopefully Dario Saric ends up being good, and then Ricky Rubio's a starting point guard for the next 3 years, and that's what they're banking on. Like, that, they're hoping that they're going to have enough internal improvement to be a really good team over the next couple of years, and I just don't see it. So using up their cap space on someone like Ricky Rubio, that in my opinion is not worth it, just doesn't make any sense. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video. Really quickly, if you haven't seen any of the other free agency coverage and content that I've been putting out this week, I've been doing my absolute best to be putting out as much quality content as I can on all the free agency craziness, because I know there's a lot to keep up with. So if you guys haven't checked those out, then be sure to do that. Check out the boxes on screen. Once again, my name is Tucker. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and if you would like to see, like I said, any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out those boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.